Good morning, everyone. You're tuned in to 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester, and this is Evidence of Design. It is Saturday, September 5th, 2020. We're getting on the horn a little late here, so we are live for you on Saturday, September 5th, 2020. Thank you for tuning in to your local grassroots independent media station. I'm your host, Jason Taylor of Evidence of Design. I'm also joined in studio by my good friends, co-hosts, and special guest. We have Matt Treadwell.
Hello.
Mary Lawrence.
Good morning.
And special guest, Aaron from Queens.
Hello.
Aaron from Rochester now.
I'm still from Queens. I'm just in Rochester.
Indeed. So, again, we're live on Saturday, September 5th. For those new to Evidence of Design, we critique income and wealth inequality. We investigate where economic inequality comes from and what its effects are. We think there's far too much economic inequality in our society, and it has drastic and negative effects on all aspects of our society. That is the bulk of what we cover on the show, in addition to other topics. On today's show, we will be covering recent protests in Rochester, New York. Of course, we've had organizations and demonstrations happening all summer in favor of racial justice and in response to police brutality. And of course, this week here in Rochester, New York, we saw body cam footage of Daniel Prude being what looks to me like being murdered by the Rochester Police Department. I'm sure folks are relatively familiar with that case because it's made national news and, of course, has roiled us locally. So we probably don't need to go into too much of the details surrounding that. But we'll be covering the protests here locally throughout the remainder of the show. We'll listen to clips from local organizers like Ashley Gant, Stanley Martin, Melanie Funchess. We'll hear statements from the mayor, Police Chief Laron Singletary, the police union president, Mazzeo, among other people. And we also want to hear from you, Rochester. Give us a call anytime throughout the hour at 585-219-8889. Again, that's 585-219-8889. How are you feeling? What are you thinking? Are you out there in the streets? Are you staying home? What has the police response been like? What changes do you think, if any, we need to see in our community? We want to hear from you at 585-219-8889. So let's jump right into things. There have been several hearings, meetings over the past several days. On Wednesday, I believe, was when the footage of Daniel Prude's death was first released to us as members of the public here in Rochester. There are reports and certainly allegations of the mayor and the RPD having covered up Daniel Prude's death. This happened way back in March. This was months before George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, etc. were murdered by police somewhat later on in the year. So this was, before all of that. This was 5 to 6 months ago, and there are allegations that the mayor and RPD have covered this up. And I think what the mayor would say and has said was that she didn't know about this until later, and that she and the RPD were following the law and guidelines from the Attorney General's office for them to complete their own investigation. The New York Times, among others, have reported that it does not seem consistent with the law, that the mayor's office and the RPD could have released this on their own accord, as has been done in other cities with similar, unfortunately, cases throughout the time. So we'll get more to what the mayor and the police chief and things are saying as local leaders, but let's hear from other local leaders now, too. These are organizers, protesters, people who have led the local movement through, Free the People Rock, etc. Let's hear now from Stanley Martin. Let's hear from Ashley Gant. This is from yesterday's news conference. So September 4th, and her demands for, what our local leaders should do in response to Daniel Prude's death.
Today we are demanding that, one,
Rochester Police Department be disbanded, and that the city begin the process of ending their contract with Mike Mazzeo and the president of the Klan Locust. We are asking that City Council reallocate resources to initiatives that address real issues and why people commit crimes. We are asking that all of the officers involved in the murder of Daniel Prude immediately be fired. We are also asking that the Attorney General right now gathers the grand jury instead of waiting months to do so.
Again, that was Ashley Gant, a local organizer, laying out her demands, among others, in Free the People Rock, saying that the more money from the Rochester Police Department should be diverted to other social services, particularly mental health services. They demand accountability for the officers who were complicit and indeed perhaps caused Daniel Prude's death, and they demand more transparency from our local leaders. Let's hear more. Now we'll hear from Stanley Martin. She is another local organizer. This is again from the Free the People Rocks news conference yesterday on Friday. Let's hear more demands from Stanley Martin.
We're hoping that Daniel Prude's death was not in vain. We want to ensure that legislation is passed and we want to call it Daniel Prude's Law, to ensure that mental health professionals respond to mental health crises. We do not need violence workers with guns responding to mental health crises. So that is so important to make that systemic change. Another thing we want to ensure is that Mayor Lovely Warren resigns. She has failed our city for years and years. She mishandled this whole incident. We believe she knew about it and she refused to take action. We will not continue to be led astray, and we want her to resign effective immediately. We need true leadership that responds to the times.
And Laurent and Mazzeo also need to resign.
All of them.
So that was Stanley Martin, among others, at a press conference yesterday, calling on the mayor, Police Chief Laurent Singletary, and Mazzeo, the president of the Rochester Police Department's, the local police union, the Locust Club, asking all of them to resign for sort of covering up Daniel Prude's death. Also calling on us as a society in Rochester to create a different force that will respond to mental health issues. When someone's having a mental health crisis, instead of sending the police, to send mental health professionals, where in this case Daniel Prude was suffering from, it seemed to me, like a mental health crisis. And so the argument being, why send a police officer whose job it is to sort of enforce so-called law and order when someone needs help? They don't need law and order.
That is, in fact, the claim or the request from Daniel Prude's brother, Joe Prude. We actually have a clip of him speaking on why he called the police, why he called for help, and what he actually was looking for, and instead of what he received. So we'll play that right now.
And this is from Wednesday, the day that the first the day that this was publicly made known to the city of Rochester. Daniel Prude's brother, Joe Prude.
Not so much as just like bring it to the attention of the city, but those in that I need to understand that I placed a phone call for my brother to get help, not for my brother to get lynched. Now, when I say got lynched, that was a full-fledged, ongoing murder, cold-blooded, none other than cold-blooded murder. How did you sit here and not directly say the man is defenseless, butt naked on the ground? He's cuffed up already. I mean, come on. How many more brothers got to die for society to understand that this needs to stop?
That was Joe Prude. I just get emotional thinking about this. To have to call the police to help your brother, and it turns out that that call ended up costing your brother's life, and that makes me emotional, and it's just that's really sad. And so we just heard from Joe Prude, the brother of Daniel Prude, on September 2nd.
Well, the police seem like they're usually the worst people to call if you need to get somebody with mental health problems help, because there's so many stories over the past many years of people in mental health crises just and the police show up and their solution is basically just shooting them. And there's got to be, I don't know how other countries deal with this stuff specifically. Maybe they have dedicated mental health response people instead of just the people with guns who show up. But there's got to be something better than that. When their first response is just, let's shoot them instead.
Well, let's hear the words of Melanie Funchess now. She's another local organizer and leader from the Greater Rochester Black Agenda here. She's also works in the mental health field with among other organizations. Let's hear from her now. This is from a press conference yesterday. The 9/4 mental health, Matt, and this one is hearing. Perhaps to answer your question, Aaron, what else we could do as a society to meet people's mental health needs?
What people need to understand is that police are a paramilitary force. You do not go to your mechanic for a haircut. So you do not call the military for a therapeutic response.
Come on.
You call the military for a military response. So what we are saying is that when people need therapeutic intervention, we call people who are trained and credentialed and certified and of the community and understanding and trained in culturally responsive practices to respond with therapeutic measures that are culturally responsive and meet the needs of the community they are intended to serve. That they do this with interventions that have been normed on the community that they are intended to serve. That they are people that come of our community. What I mean, they live here. Right. That they live, eat, work, and shop and do everything here so that they are aware of the culture of our city. When I say culture, I do not just mean race and ethnicity. I mean all of the things that make us Rochesterians. Yes.
So again, that was Melanie Funchess, member of the Greater Rochester Black Agenda and also a local mental health practitioner and promoter. She's laying out alternatives we could have for folks who are needing help, especially when it comes to mental health and not needing to have to call the police. I know there are other models out there that other communities have. I know that our city council member, Mary Lupian from the East District, is working on such a proposal to establish a new force that would respond to mental health crises as opposed to calling the police. And, so there are all other models out there. And I guess kind of the old adage, when the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem begins to look like a nail. I also think, not necessarily to be fair to police, but I do think that we ask too much of police officers. We've placed a wrong burden on them because we as a society have failed to articulate other means of serving people's needs. When someone has an issue, you call the cops on anything that's beyond your control. And that doesn't make sense to me. And we should have other institutions set up to help support people. And so, having mental health folks respond to mental health crises is one such thing.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword where we have put too much of a burden and then the police departments now have too much power. Another thing I noticed from her speech that I think is really important to kind of point out is the request that we have people respond who are part of the community. I know that we've reported on this previously, but over 80% of the Rochester Police Department does not live in the city of Rochester. And that is really critical. That's when you see someone who is part of your community and you live in the neighborhood or near the neighborhood and you have a familiarity with what's going on in the city, what kind of concerns people have, you approach problems very differently. And when we have a huge majority of the police officers in the Rochester Police Department who don't live in the city and don't share a community or a neighborhood with the people who they're serving, it starts to look less like service and more like an adversary.
Yeah, I just want to point out, I just Googled it. This is the same situation in New York, so Rochester isn't unique about that. It's not as pronounced in New York, but 51%, according to Gothamist, of NYPD officers live outside the city.
Yeah, this blew my mind this summer as I was doing reporting on the city council budget hearings with the RPD, looking up the RPD's open data portal, which is out there. The RPD provides the information. It's not as up to date as I would like it to be, but it's out there. If you Google RPD open data portal, 86% of RPD personnel are white and 85% live outside of the city of Rochester. That is mind-blowing to me. For a force 700 people large, 85% are white, 85% live outside of the city of Rochester. And so a very simple fix, what I hear Melanie also saying is, let's make sure that the folks here serving our people are from our community. And, it's unfortunate that we have to define our community by sort of one segregated community versus another. And I don't think that's what she's going for. I don't think that's what we're talking about here. Of course we don't. We are living through the results of decades of government policies that have caused segregation, along with social beliefs such as racism. So, we're roiled by that legacy, the centuries-old legacy. But there are other alternatives here. And I do think, if I remember reading the news correctly, that the mayor or city council, before even this came out about Daniel Prude, had recently made a change to the RPD to require police officers, RPD, to be from the city of Rochester. I'd have to double check on that, but I believe that they had either proposed or approved that, and the Locust Club, the local city police union, was against that, saying, we can't, we're having hiring problems anyways, how can we possibly hire folks from the city of Rochester, and things of that nature. So our long story short, the RPD, 86% white, 85% live outside of the city of Rochester. That's mind-blowing to me. That's worth noting as sort of a fact.
Especially when you consider all other city positions. Like, if you want to work in the library in the city of Rochester, you have to live in the city of Rochester. And almost every other city position that is employable through the city of Rochester, you have to live in the city, or you have to move to the city within a year. And I think that is a fair request to make of the Rochester Police Department. People who are serving this community should also be part of it.
Certainly. And just a reminder for folks that you're tuned into 100.9 FM WXIR. You're listening to Evidence of Design. And on today's hour, we are talking about local protests and local organizations for racial justice and against police brutality. Of course, this time, most recently, in reference to the death of Daniel Prude way back in March. And we are only finding out about this publicly as of this past week on Wednesday, when Joe Prude, the brother of Daniel Prude, and the lawyer and his lawyer and so on and so forth, released the body cam footage from this case and made this public to us. There are allegations that the mayor and the Rochester Police Department covered this up, this whole case, wanting to sweep it underneath the rug, or not take it up and make it public. Of course, that given the backdrop and context of the Black Lives Matter movement and other protests this summer around, renewed proof, really, not renewed interest in, just like renewed proof that are made a lot more publicly available to folks of all sort of stripes, that police brutality and especially racism and racial injustice is a thing that we really demands change now, and not, we'll get to it, but right now. And so that's what we're talking about on today's hour. We've so far been listening to statements from local organizers and leaders such as Stanley Martin, Ashley Gant, Melanie Funchess, and also we heard a clip from Joe Prude, again, Daniel Prude's brother. We'd invite you to call in and lend your voice on our show, on this show, on your local grassroots and independent community radio station by giving us a call at 585-219-8889. Again, that's 585-219-8889. We are live on Saturday, September 5th, and want your voice to be part of this as well, because we're all a part of this community, and you have thoughts and opinions and desires and experiences that matter too. 585-219-8889. Let's turn our attention now to the first day, the first press conference on September 2nd. We'll hear again from Stanley Martin. This is more demands, more context that is being laid out in response to Daniel Prude's, death or murder. Again, this is Stanley Martin on the first day that this was made public.
On Wednesday.
Yes, on Wednesday.
Prude's brother Joe Prude, his family, and the attorneys who will be representing him. On March 23rd, 2020, the Rochester Police Department executed a black man named Daniel Prude. Mr. Prude was naked, defenseless, unarmed, and experiencing a mental health crisis. Daniel's brother Joe called 911 for help. No one trained to respond to a mental health crisis arrived to the 400 block of Jefferson Avenue, but Rochester Police did. Daniel complied with all orders subsequently following their arrival. While cuffed, naked, unarmed, and laying down in the freezing cold ground, RPD officers mocked Daniel Prude, cracked jokes, and put a bag over his head. RPD officers Mark Vaughn, Troy Talladay, and Francisco Santiago then proceeded to swarm him. While Talladay forced his knee into Daniel's back and Santiago held down his legs, Vaughn pushed Daniel's head into the ground using all the weight of his body, essentially in triangle push-up position. Less than 10 minutes after Mr. Prude was cuffed, he uttered his last conscious breath. We are devastated by the loss of another black life at the hands of the Rochester Police Department. We are disgusted that Mayor Lovely Warren and Chief Laron Singletary have made no effort to hold Daniel Prude's murderers accountable. In fact, Daniel Prude's killers are still on active duty today. We are livid that the Locust Club president, Mike Mazzio, uses his resources to defend the murderers, yet 2 days ago he publicly stated that Rochester does not have the problems other parts of the country has in relation to police violence. Knowing full well the RPD murdered a man in need of help, Mayor Warren rewarded the police with $100 million and also approved a new $16 million police station. It is abhorrent that Rochester has no capacity to respond to mental health crises in any other way than state-sanctioned violence and coercion. There is no place for police who are fundamentally violence workers in responding to mental health emergencies. To Lovely Warren, Loretta Scott, Willie Lightfoot, Mitch Gruber, Malik Evans, Jackie Ortiz, Michael Patterson, Lachey Harris, and Jose Pio, all who are city council members who have voted and supported spending on police violence at the expense of human life, Daniel Prude's blood is on your hands. Free the People Rock stands with Daniel's family, expects them to be accomplished immediately. We demand an immediate arrest and firing of all officers involved, including and especially Mark Vaughn, Troy Talladay, and Francisco Santiago. We also demand the firing of officers who stood idly by while watching a man get killed. Their names: Andrew Spexor, Josiah Harris, Sergeant Michael Magri, Paul Ricotta, and Lieutenant Gregory Bello. We demand that the sergeants and senior officers who worked on covering up this murder through their police reports and biased investigation also be held accountable. Their names: Sergeant Flermer Zelnovic, investigator Randy Benjamin, and investigator Michael Houlihan. The mayor and city council must also immediately pass legislation forbidding officers to respond to mental health calls. We must create an alternative to police for emergency responses, staffed by mental health professionals trained in the use of clinical treatment as alternatives to the police. We have no...
Again, that was Stanley Martin talking on the press conference in front of the mayor's building on September 2nd. Just as a note, at the time of press conference, the officers had not yet been held accountable at all. All 7 officers present at the killing of Daniel Prude have since been suspended. At the moment, that is suspended with pay, and Free the People Rock is still calling for the officers to be fired and prosecuted for the murder of Daniel Prude.
You guys all saw the video, right?
Yeah.
It reminded me of Abu Ghraib.
And remind folks what Abu Ghraib is.
It was the basically torture prison that the U.S. was running in Iraq. And a lot of terrible images came out there of people hooded, naked, tied up with, electric shock, and other things attached to them. And Daniel was lying naked on that freezing cold street with a hood over his head, and it just struck me, very much like a torture scene. And I don't know how. It seems crazy to me that not just one, but a whole group of police officers, a whole group of fellow humans there was just standing around and looking at this man, this naked man on the ground, dying and choking to death, and thinking this was somehow acceptable. And I think it speaks to the power of groupthink and the power of one's position to dictate one's behavior. This might sound a little hyperbolic, but I think it's useful as a point of comparison as to how the Nazis operate with the studies that have come out looking at the possibility of and the potential of just one's position to dictate your evil behavior, and how the Nazis truly did all believe they were just following orders and that they were doing the right thing. And I think it's important to recognize that we all have the same capacity for doing evil in all of us to a similar extent, and that if you're put into a similar position and you think to yourself right now, oh, I wouldn't do that, I wouldn't act that way, you very well still might, because that is the role you've been thrust into. And that's why, as one of the speakers that we listened to, I forgot which one, was talking about, is that you can't respond to situations like this with a organization that's completely dedicated to essentially responding to violence and only with violence. They're showing up with guns, not with any other tools, essentially, at their disposal. And if all you have is a gun, then eventually all you're going to see is, problems, is things to shoot with that gun. So, yeah, the current structure, I understand that there still needs to be some kind of peacekeeping force in society. No matter how much we eliminate systemic issues like poverty or lack of education, or drive out mental health problems as much as we can, there will still obviously be violence. That is the nature of humans. But
there'll be groups.
Yeah, absolutely. But we've got to start responding to this stuff with something other than as one of the people we listen to called basically just a paramilitary force. There has to be some alternative.
If I can just jump off that point real quick, Aaron, the Rochester Police Department conducted an internal review of the body cam footage back in April and found that the officers involved in Daniel Prude's murder had behaved in accordance with their training. And I think that the RPD will tell you that in defense of the officers involved, but I think we should all read that as an indictment of the system.
And specifically of the police department itself, because just think about, like, if any other organization, if you went into your bank and you ended up in a situation where you were tied up naked on the floor of your bank and with a hood over your head, and then you went into a coma and died, probably, and then let's say it's just to pick on Wells Fargo, let's say it was because I bank with Wells Fargo, and Wells Fargo came out and they were like, oh yeah, actually we treated this customer in accordance with our training. Everything was normal with this customer. Well, Wells Fargo, I say would because I don't know what would happen in the context of 21st century American capitalism, but there's a good possibility the entire company would be shut down. Like, no, you can't murder your customers. You can't do that. And especially not in such a grotesquely horrific way. So I think obviously there are situations in which it's more ambiguous, people who might seem to be reaching for a gun, people who do have a gun, and they're shot by the police. And by the way, other countries have still figured out how to deal with people with guns, other than simply shooting them.
So have we.
Right. Yeah.
Oftentimes if the person happens to be white.
Yes, exactly, yeah. we seem to take white mass shooters into custody without shooting them consistently. Yeah, just one of these extreme situations that you see in a video like this should be cause to just shut that organization down entirely. There's no excuse.
Well, that's a great point, Matt and Aaron. Let's hear how Mike Mazzeo, again, he's the president of the Locust Club, the local police union, justified whether or not what the officers did was correct. And Matt, as you said, yeah, Mike Mazzeo essentially said that the officers involved in Prude's arrest conducted themselves consistent with their training. He said, quote, "I think when this investigation is over and you compare it to just what the training they went through, it looks to me like they were watching the training in front of them and doing it step by step by what that training says to do." He goes on to say, if there's a problem with that and there's an issue with it, then let's change it. So
that sounds like a great idea.
Aaron, I hear what you're saying too. And yeah, it's funny, if here's this guy defending what the officers did, saying they were following their training. Well, I think that's the problem. Right? That we're training officers to not do things that are helpful to so-called their customers, their residents.
Were these officers trained at Abu Ghraib? Is that where they worked before this?
Well, I think that adds to the argument of, every time we hear about an incident like this in which a black person is murdered by police, there are those who raise their voices and say, not all cops, it's just a few bad apples. But that argument loses much of its weight when you realize that this is happening all over the country and has been happening for decades. It seems to me that, if this is happening in such geographically diverse and disparate locations as New York City, Rochester, Portland, Oregon, all over the nation, that's a systemic issue.
Also, if the president of the police union is saying this was part of their training and this is how they were trained, that totally takes away the argument of not all cops, because that is specifically what they're being trained to do.
Exactly.
Under their own argument. So maybe we should take a listen to what Mazzeo says.
I don't have a clip from Mazzeo, but that is that was his quote. Again, you can find this online. He did a press conference yesterday, I believe, and you can watch his full press conference there. But again, it was Mazzeo kind of defending what his officers did, saying they did an internal investigation, and hey, we didn't find anything wrong because the officers didn't break what they had to do in training. They were following their training, and indeed that's the problem. And I appreciate what Aaron's bringing up in terms of like this sort of groupthink mentality. It goes back to, there's an author called Hannah Arendt and the banality of evil, and the idea that anyone can sort of become able and eligible to do things that you might not otherwise do as you want to be, as you like to think yourself being capable of doing. We see this on the internet all the time of trolls, just being, let me back up and say that you can tie in sexism here. The police departments tend to be like a boys club. You can tie in capitalism here. Police departments are essentially, the fundamental role of police is to defend capitalism and make sure that the rights of private property are, sacrosanct and not violated. And indeed, this is what, police originally responded also to reports that Daniel Prude had smashed some windows near where they eventually encountered him. And so the idea,
precious windows,
right? So the idea of breaking private property is the worst thing you can do in a capitalist society.
Property is valued more than
human life. Exactly, indeed, black life. Yeah, and so that's the fundamental problem with policing in this day and age. Is like you're holding things higher than human lives, black lives. Ergo, Black Lives Matter, and it all kind of ties together in one larger stew. And as we bring up on this show before, a big point for us is we need to re-articulate our society to have values be greater than that of the free market. And, we don't necessarily need to go down that rabbit hole, but just saying over and over again, like, hey, human lives matter. Folks who talk about socialism or, community living and making sure human needs are met, that's because humans matter. Humans are probably the most important thing on the totem pole of living in a society, is making sure humans are well off. And when you see a police department do this to another human being who is nonviolent and unarmed, that's a problem. And that demands change. And like what Aaron's saying, any other institution would be kind of shut down, but somehow police departments over and over and over and over again, if there even are investigations and they take months, and you have leaders saying, well, we have to wait until the investigations are fully concluded until we can reach any decisions. And then they're oftentimes never convicted, or they still are getting paid, never brought to trial. And this happens over and over and over again.
You know how it feels like we've been living in coronavirus forever, and it's just going on and on and on and on, and there's no escape. It sort of is how it feels like listening to these situations with police violence year after year after year, except it's been going on even longer. I remember many years ago, so many cases like the Daniel Shaver case, I believe, in Arizona. That was a number of years ago now, and police officers acquitted. And just at least I guess there might be progress because officers are now being brought to trial and almost all of them acquitted now. But how many cases have there been throughout American history where there was never any trial, there was never any grand jury, there was never even the thought to bring these officers to any sort of justice? It was just considered normal police behavior to basically just be murdering with impunity.
Yeah. And when we think about this case, the way that it was originally written down didn't make it seem like a murder at all. It's only when we're seeing the body cam footage nearly 6 months after it happened that we're understanding what happened. And that's only because the police were wearing a body cam. As one of the organizers said in a press conference this week, if one of the reasons we haven't seen this over the past 5 months is because the public wasn't there to record it. And that's maybe a nod to the power of social media and the power of video recording, and that many, many people carry video cameras on them on their cell phones all the time. But we wouldn't know about these things if they're happening in the middle of the night and there's no camera footage. It's only now that we're actually being able to see them and share them and show people. And even that is not enough for everyone.
This does seem to be just the standard for how police operate in real life. And I remember watching many years ago when Chappelle's show was on, that sketch where they have a couple of cops and they shoot somebody and they're like, oh, just sprinkle some crack on them. And I was watching that and I was like, oh, that's funny, of course. Chappelle's show is great, but it's obviously hyperbole, it's exaggeration. But now we realize that's literally just how police operate. Like, whether or not they, literally sprinkle crack on the people they shoot or whatever, they're doing it through the reports, through the paperwork, through the covering up for each other and getting their stories straight, and basically just operating like a criminal cartel, basically just operating like the mafia afterwards, is all rallying around each other and everything like that.
And Aaron, you brought up parallels with coronavirus earlier, and I think another unfortunate parallel that police brutality has with coronavirus is that you have to assume that the number of deaths is higher than those reported.
Right. And the problem with talking about police, too, is, police is the modern incarnation of a problem that we can tackle and see. But when we're talking about it specifically to the black community, I mean, this has been happening to the black community, these extrajudicial killings without justice brought to the killers for centuries, whether or not it was a white mob or a white slave owner or just any random person, And so now we have the modern incarnation. Of course, I'm not saying all police departments or all police officers are doing this, but, it's just sort of the modern incarnation. And thankfully, we've made slow, incremental steps as a society, but clearly we have a long way to go, and clearly why wait any longer? When we keep invoking the definition of insanity, and keep making, expecting things to change while we're making the same actions. Why wait longer when human lives are on the line, human dignity is on the line, human justice is on the line? Is that not the most important thing when you're a human being?
The local police used to be heavily complicit in lynchings and mob violence in the Jim Crow South. There's so many stories of a mob shows up to the police station and the police just open the doors and let them take whoever they want to grab and lynch.
Yeah. As a reminder, folks, you are tuned in to 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. This is Evidence of Design, and we're talking about recent protests and organizing in response to the killing of Daniel Prude several months ago, but it only now became revealed to us as a community in Rochester this week. We still want to hear from you. 585-219-8889. Have you been going to the protests? Are you going to go to protests? What do you think about what we're experiencing as a community or going through at large as a country? What should be our response? Do we need changes to policing? What do you think should happen? 585-219-8889. As a member of this community, your voice matters on your local, independent, grassroots community radio station. 100.9 FM WXIR. Again, 585-219-8889. Perhaps we should look to how our elected leaders or appointed leaders have responded to this case. Mayor Lovely Warren in particular. Oh, Mayor Warren. So there are allegations that she has covered up this case. She says that she only heard about this case, on August 4th when she saw the body cam footage. She says that originally Police Chief Laron Singletary, way back when this happened in March, told her that, the death of Daniel Prude was because of a drug overdose. Mary, you brought this up earlier, how, initial reports were that he overdosed. The police had nothing to do with it. So she says that she was misled by her police chief. That's a very public and stinging response to Singletary, whom she has defended for a long time publicly. And she said, she has no plans to fire Police Chief Laron Singletary or make him step down or resign. And so the mayor's response thus far has been kind of passing off the burden, saying, okay, not only did I not really know this was going on, but then when it was brought to my attention, my hands are tied behind my back because it was up to the Attorney General's office to finish its investigation in order to make sure that, justice can be brought to this case.
I would just like to quickly note that Mayor Warren initially gave her first press conference on Wednesday, and Police Chief Laron Singletary was in attendance with her then. Then on Thursday, she gave another press conference in which Laron Singletary was not present, and that was when she leveled those accusations against him that he had misled her, which is interesting.
Yep. So we do have a caller. Let's turn our attention now to whoever's on the line. Hey, thanks for calling. What's on your mind?
Hi, Jason. This is June.
Hi, June. Thanks for giving us a call. What's on your mind?
I am thinking about this whole news. So sorry, let me turn off my audio.
It's great. We can hear you twice.
Hear about this story. I wasn't aware of it until Aaron posted it on his Instagram stories, and obviously it's very heartbreaking. I'm not a member of the Rochester community, and I'm not a member of the Black community, but I think all of us across this country have seen these instances of police brutality and unreasonable murders of citizens, and I don't know when it's going to stop. But one thing that's been really on my mind is whether or not people join the police with the expectations of upholding this image of police as heroes in our community. I think, especially thinking about how there is the Blue Lives Matter movement, I'm not really sure what perspective that is coming from. We're not saying cops' lives don't matter, but I wonder if the police community realizes that they are supposed to be serving the community and they're supposed to be heroes of society. They are supposed to be the protectors of our world. And right now, it doesn't seem like they're doing a great job at protecting citizens who really need help. I think all of our occupations come with hazards, and I think, in my mind at least, the occupational hazard of being a police officer is very, very great. You are basically putting your life on the line in your service to the community, in protecting the community.
But less so than lumberjacks. or truckers. To be fair.
And
more of them die on the job than police.
And I work in the food industry. Food reviewers who go to restaurants to eat endlessly, to turn out reviews, to give their opinion about what's good, what's bad. A lot of them are probably not on the greatest of diets. It probably takes a detriment on their physical health to be constantly eating out at restaurants. But that's just part of the job. And I wonder, does the police community realize that that comes with the job? I know it seems silly to compare it to a comic book story or a movie rendition of it, but in Spider-Man, that line, with great power comes great responsibility. Do we realize that? And are we upholding the police community to that standard of putting their lives on the line, of knowing when to use restraint, certainly much more than they are using right now, because it doesn't seem like they're using much restraint nowadays, of when to use that restraint when they're on the job, when their number one purpose should be to protect the community and not property. Goes without saying that it's really, really depressing to see that our world and our society has come to this point where we have created this whole economy of consumerism, of capitalism, of just keep churning money. And what does money even signify for us anymore, except maybe the destruction of our humanity and our environment?
Thanks a lot for calling in, June. There's a lot to unpack there. I guess the only thing I'll offer before I let my other colleagues respond, and also to invite other folks to give us a call at 585-219-8889, is that, June, I agree with you that the police's role is to so-called protect and serve. And I think something that I go to, and what I think a lot of organizers are going to too, is like, why protect and serve a system that is fundamentally inhuman to begin with? Why protect and serve the interests of private property and excesses of capitalism and the thin blue line that protects us against what? What are the licentious hordes? Who are they? I'm more worried about my back broken by capitalism than I am about sort of citizens having freedom to live their life in a healthy way. I'm just confused about what that thin blue line is really protecting us from. And so I guess that's where I would go. And thanks for sharing, June. There's a lot there.
Sure thing. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, I think that there is still a lot of implicit racism in America. And so a lot of the reasoning why, or a lot of the supporters of police officers, police forces who think that they are a necessity in much of the country, they feel that there are people typically belonging of a certain specific population who are just a threat in general to so-called law and order. It's my belief, my view, that by engendering a system in which certain people are just more disadvantaged than others because of ridiculous and arbitrary reasons like the color of their skin or ethnicity, and by the operation of these systems creating societies, communities of we have a caller. Societies and communities that are disproportionately lacking in opportunity and more affected by poverty, that we are creating crime, and that the answer to this is not to build up police forces, it is to build up our communities.
And let's turn our attention to another caller on Evidence of Design, 100.9 FM WXIR. What's on your mind?
Hey, Jason, it's Graham.
Hey, Graham. Thanks for giving us a call.
Hey.
What are you thinking about?
Yeah. I just was wondering if I could share some of my experiences from being out at the protest last night.
Sure. Graham, you have about 2.5 minutes. Give it a go.
Cool. Right now?
Yes, go for it.
Oh.
I'm waiting.
Very cool.
Excited.
Well, hi, everybody. My name's Graham. I was out at the protest last night and the night before. I guess I'm still processing what happened, but the big takeaway for me, at least one of them, is that protesters did not start the violence that we saw. We were peaceful until the police confronted us on Court Street and opened fire with pepper bullets, I'm sure some rubber bullets as well, and gave us really no chance to disperse before doing that. They were prepared to do that. Like when we got there, it seemed like that's what their plan was to wait for us to get there and then just do that. And one of the clips you played earlier, Melanie Funchess said that the police are a paramilitary force, and that's exactly what it seems like. And it's just like traumatizing a bit. But so we need to be out there doing this. One of the primary goals of these protests, like I see them, or as I see them, is to directly confront the police as a paramilitary force and force them to behave in the ways that they've been trained to behave and paid to behave for so long, and have all this happen on camera for the world to see. Because it's through doing that we are able to show people who don't believe us when we say that this system is corrupt and racist and horrible. It's to show them exactly what we mean. And it's dangerous doing this. But the more people we have out every night, the safer we all are together, and the more powerful the message becomes. So I guess that's the other thing I wanted to say is, we're going to be out there again tonight, 6:30 on Jefferson Avenue. Follow Free the People Rock on Facebook for more info. If you haven't been out, please come out. And if you've been going out, continue doing so. I hope to see as many people there tonight as possible.
Graham, thank you for calling in. We're going to have to let you go for the sake of time. Stay safe. Be well.
Problem. Thanks, Jason.
So we will have to end today's show there. Thank you all for tuning in to 100.9 FM WXIR and listening to Evidence of Design. Up next is the Esquire Hour. They always put on a great show, and those folks have been involved in the local organizations, local protesting as well. So stay tuned for them. Otherwise, thank you all for tuning in. Let's continue to fight for social justice and a world that looks out for the interests of all of us. That sounds good to me. Until next time, be well. Be safe, take care, and bye-bye.